Hey everybody, it's John Barrows. Happy Monday. It's Make It Happen Mondays, and I'm doing this once again from the backyard of Casa Barrows here because inside of my house is getting redone with hardwood floors and painting and a new bathroom and all that stuff. So the amount of noise that's happening inside my house right now would make this quite annoying. So we're going to do this from the beautiful backyard. The weather here in Boston is fantastic. Hope you all had a great weekend. Ready to close out the quarter strong. We got about two weeks left in the quarter here, so you got to focus on closing out deals, but also remember Q4 is probably the strongest for most of us. So we got to make sure that we look at our pipeline and realize which deals are real and which ones we should be focusing on, as well as do some prospecting to make sure that January isn't a dud. So with that, a couple of things from last week. Hopefully, for all you football fans out there, hopefully your team did well. Obviously, my Patriots didn't. On the home opener on Thursday night, they pretty much embarrassed themselves, which, as ridiculous and pissed off as I was learning about that, it's probably the best thing that could have happened to them because expectations, I think people were, at least here in New England, were talking about 18-0 and all that stuff. And when you walk into a season with that big of a head, you know nothing but bad can happen. So anyways, I'm kind of glad they got punched in the face and brought back down to reality because that gives Belichick and Brady all the fuel they need to just grind that team and get them to figure out what's going on here. So one game at a time, just as always with Belichick. Today, though, we're going to be talking about one of my favorite topics, which is content versus context. So I'm going to be talking about why that's important for us as sales professionals. Riff on that for a little bit, but obviously, as always, feel free to chime in with questions. I'll answer any question you have at any aspect or part of the sales process, or as it relates to what we're talking about here. So, context versus content. When I first came across this concept, if you will, Gary Vaynerchuk brought it up. And it's actually what got me interested in Gary V in the first place. I think it was one of the first videos I saw from him about a year and a half, 2 years ago. And he talked a lot about, what he said was, look, everybody talks about content is king, right? Content is king. And I've been saying that for a long time with content marketing and all this other stuff. It's, content is king and whoever has the best content wins. And I think when account-based marketing really started to hit and content marketing really started to hit, what's up, Colin? But I think when that hit, that was correct. I think the best content usually rose to the top and differentiated you. But now that the market has been so flooded with content, it's not necessarily the case anymore. But regardless, they talked about content as king. This is, again, what Gary said. He said, look, fine, if content is king, then context is God. And that got me thinking about marketing versus sales. Right? Marketing is content. Sales is context. If we as sales professionals are not putting any context around our content, then we are absolutely no different than marketing, and I have no idea why we're getting paid to do what we do. So for instance, I'll give you some examples here. This is why, you've heard me talk about this ad nauseum as far as death of the average sales rep, about how I think the average sales rep is going to, I know they're dying a painful death right now. They're getting replaced through technology, right? The ones who are blasting out template emails, through their cadence tools or whatever, the ones who are, making generic cold calls with a script or asking just bant questions and going through the motions there or pressing play on demos, all that stuff, that to me is content. And those are the ones that are going to get replaced because I don't see the difference here in marketing. And actually, I think marketing can do most of that stuff better than we can because marketing is actually going to pay attention to the details where we're not. Marketing, for instance, when they send out those template emails, they're going to split test them. They're going to look to see, hey, what message is resonating and make the tweaks and adjustments, and they're going to see that. Or if they do a demo online, for instance, they're going to look at that demo and say, where do people click through? Where do they spend the most time on it? All that stuff, where sales reps aren't going to do that. And so that to me is content. And again, as sales reps, if we're not given that context, what's the point? So let's talk about emails for an example. Emails that are people are just droning through and blasting out template emails. the context I'm talking about is maybe taking some of those emails and add, maybe the marketing material is fine, but coming out and saying, hey, John, this material that I have from a marketing standpoint, this is why I think it's relevant to you personally, okay? Now, I know we can't personalize every single email we send out or every phone call we make. I understand that. But at least put some context. Like, why is this relevant to me as a VP of sales in the training industry, for instance, or as a CEO in the training industry? Same thing with cold calls, right? I mean, reading a script, that's just regurgitating. I could record that on a thing and send that out a million times in a recorded thing. Trust me, I get them, right, all the time. Cold calls from vendors and suppliers of mortgage companies and stuff. Put some context, do a little bit of homework, see what's going on as far as, something about me that you can put some relevance to say, hey, John, the reason I'm calling is because I read something about you, I saw something. Same thing with social selling here, all right? It drives me crazy when people just like retweet a 39-page ebook, right? Or it's, they don't say anything about it. Like, they just keep reposting other people's content with no context around it. Like, why is that content important to you? Why do you think it's relevant? You know how many 39-page ebooks I have in my things to read folder? I don't know about you guys, I got a things to read folder. It's the largest folder in my entire inbox, and I haven't read a single thing in there. So, but why not take that 39-page ebook, read it, and then tweet it out there and say, hey, really good 39-page ebook here. If you're a VP of sales in the SaaS industry trying to integrate social selling into your routine, why don't, take a look at pages 22 to 35, because that's really where the core value of this ebook is, and it talks about some very tactical things. It's like, oh, okay, cool. Or, here's one, webinars. You know how many webinars I sign up for? I sign up for hundreds of webinars. Do you know how many I attend? 0. You know why? Because I know right after that webinar, I'm going to get that email from the marketing department or whoever that says, hey, sorry you missed the webinar. Here's a link to it. Let me know if you have any questions or something like that. And it's going to go in my things to read folder, and I'm never going to look at it again. But if a rep were to ever take that webinar, like say I signed up for the webinar and I missed it, and if you as a rep would then say, hey, John, I saw you sign up for the webinar. I noticed you missed it. I wanted to reach out to you. If you start listening to this webinar at minute 15 and go from minute 15 to 32 or 22 or something like that, that's really where the core value of this webinar is, and because it talks about these things, and that's why I thought you might find this interesting. If a rep were to ever do that to me, I would immediately start looking at them differently, right? Same thing, I had a rep approach me a little while ago. I was doing a call blitz with a team, and this one rep came up and he said, hey, John, I need some advice here, man. I just did this campaign where we sent books to executives, right? They FedExed books to executives. And, it was like 25 of them or something like that. And he's like, I didn't get one response. I was like, oof, that sucks. That's an expensive campaign to get 0 responses from, right? But, so I was like, all right, well, let me kind of sit down and look at your contact strategy. Like, what's the story that you told this person outside of just sending them a book and then following up and saying, did you get my book? What was the strategy there? But my first question to him was, just out of curiosity, before we get started here, did you read the book? And the rep was like, well, no. I'm like, well, then why did you send it? You know how many books I have on my bookshelf upstairs that I haven't even cracked the binding for? I don't need some random-ass sales rep to send me some random book because their boss said it was, or said it had something to do with social selling or sales or something like that. But if you're going to do that, here's an example. I mean, if you guys follow me, one of the things I preach about is trying to figure out a way to try to drive recurring value to my audience so that I can create recurring revenue for myself, so I can eventually get off of a plane one of these days and spend more time with my daughter and my wife, right? I mean, my daughter's 7 years old. I'm really trying to figure out how I can be home more, okay? So I talk about that a lot. I blog about it. I tweet about it. I Snapchat about it, those type of things. And so if a rep was paying attention, and I don't know if you guys have read The 4-Hour Workweek, the book, one of the most famous books out there, about really managing your time efficiently and doing some offloading of responsibilities and outsourcing stuff. If a rep were to kind of follow me and then read that book and then send it to me and say, hey, John, and I was reading the other day, the 4-Hour Work Week, and, I know you talk a lot about trying to create recurring value and recurring revenue so you can get off of a plane. Well, I was reading 4-Hour Work Week, and it was really interesting to me because Chapter 7 talked about these things and some very tactical things that you could do to help, try to get yourself off a plane. I thought you might appreciate this. If a rep were to ever do that, and I'm not saying do that. Don't do that to me, by the way. If you're listening to this podcast, please don't send me the 4-Hour Work Week. I've already read it. I get it. I appreciate it, though. But if a rep were to do that, I would immediately start looking at them differently, right? That context around that content is so important. And my final one, I'll give you the example of that bugs the shit out of me in every way. And by the way, Daniel, I tend to agree with you. I've rarely come across a 39-page ebook that I've thought was any decent at all. But let's talk about demos. I hate demos. I can't stand demos because every demo is exactly the same. Exactly the same. Most reps, what they'll do is they'll say, say it's a 30-minute. So back up. I go through a lot of demos on a weekly basis because I'm a one-man show. I'm not a real good lead for anybody, but I obviously work with some decent clients like Salesforce, LinkedIn, and all that stuff. And so a lot of these sales tool companies want to show me their newest tool or whatever it is so I can introduce it to my audience, right? So, and look, I want to see the newest, coolest technologies out there. That's what I'm trying to figure out. That's part of the value I bring to my audience and to my clients. And so, I don't know, I go through 3, 4, 5 demos on a weekly basis, but every one of them is exactly the same. Every one of them. Hey, John, is this still a good time? So first of all, when somebody picks up the phone for a scheduled appointment, do not ask them if this is still a good time. Why would you give me that out? It's actually, you know what, I got to go to the bathroom right now. You know what, why don't we reschedule this for a little bit later? But they always say, is this still a good time? Okay, well, I got about a 30-minute demo here that I'd like to go through with you. And if you have any questions about it as we go through it, just let me know. Okay. And then and they press play, and they go through every single slide like they were trained for in boot camp and got their badge for. And then they pause intermittently and say stuff like, does that make sense? Does that make sense? By the way, has anybody ever said no to that question? Anybody ever, you ever been doing a demo where you've said, does that make sense? And somebody's been like, holy shit, dude, I have no idea what you just said there. No clue. And by the way, when I used to ask, does that make sense? 9 times out of 10, I'd be asking myself that question. I'd be like, does that make sense? Because I don't think it did. I was just rambling there for the past 15, 20 minutes, and I really have no idea what I just said. So they say, does that make sense? And they get oh yeah, that makes sense. And then at the end, after going through a canned demo, they say, oh, thank you so much for your time today. Do you have any questions? And 99% of the time, when you go through a canned demo like that doesn't have context around what the client needs or what their priorities are, at the end, the client will say, you know what, that looks really interesting. It sounds really interesting. Why don't you, could you send me the slide deck or the presentation and follow me in a couple of weeks and we'll take it from there? Or, by the way, and I've written about this, if you ever hear this word at the end of one of your demos, you've done a miserable job, and it's the word digest. Where you hear, you know what, John, I need a little time to digest what you just said to me right just there. It's like, if you ever hear that word, apologize to the person that you just wasted their time. Because it is our job as sales professionals to help our clients digest the information. If they're walking out more confused than they were walking in, we've done a terrible job as a sales professional. So instead of that, which I think is content, by the way, if you just drone through your slide deck and your presentation and barely even qualify the account before you do it, first of all, you're a lazy sales rep, because what you're saying there is the demo and the product is actually way more necessary in this process than I am as a sales rep. Right? So you're really discrediting yourselves out of the gate by just relying on the presentation, and you're not engaging with anybody, right? That to me is content. And as a marketer with a marketer background, for me, I can create a better presentation than you can through online click-throughs and avatars and whatever, right? So context on a demo is, hopefully it's been pre-qualified up until the point where you are giving that demo, and it's a customized demo anyways. But if it's not, say you got a demo that lasts 30 minutes. Nobody wants to listen to every single thing in that 30-minute demo, okay? I wrote a blog post a little while ago called Sell to the 20%. Which means, I fundamentally believe that the majority of people pick a product or service that you buy, right? I almost guarantee you only use about 10 to 20% of the functionality of whatever that is, right? I mean, think of your iPhone, right? that thing has more power in it than we use to send somebody to the moon, and yet most people just, Snapchat, look at their Facebook, and maybe respond to a few emails. Excel. Think about Excel, Microsoft Excel. It's one of the more powerful tools out there if you really know how to use Excel. But most people just add some, right, whatever. So because I think most people only use 10 to 20% of what they purchase, that's how I believe people buy. And by the way, if they aren't buying that way, I think they're doing it wrong, because there's really 10 to 20% that's going to make a difference. And usually that is the stuff that aligns with my priorities, that aligns with what I'm trying to accomplish as a business. So, for instance, context versus content. Content is you delivering those 30 slides or the 30-minute presentation, one slide all the way through, and not really doing, does that make sense? Context is, hey, thanks so much for your time today. One of the first things I wanted to do is I want to go around and get an intro. Now, whether this is over the phone or in person. Just a quick introduction, and what do you want to get out of today's presentation? What are some of your priorities that you're really trying to address here? Because I could talk all day long about my solutions, but I really want to focus this presentation on the parts that are most relevant to you. Because I got about a 30-slide or a 30-minute presentation here. I'd like to cut this down about 10 to 15 minutes and make it as relevant to you as possible. So hopefully the client appreciates that, right? Because you could say, look, I have two approaches to this presentation. I can go through all these slides and go through the 30 minutes at the end if you want, and see, does that make sense? Or we can spend the first 5 to 10 minutes talking about your priorities and what you want to get out of this, and then I can really kind of focus on the parts of this presentation that are most relevant. Which would you rather do? Hopefully they'll say the latter, right? If they say the former, they're probably just kicking tires and going through the motions anyways, so I'd be a little worried about that regardless. But you do that and then say, oh, and also, so after you go through and understand their priorities and what they want to get out of that presentation, then you let them know, okay, you know what, as we go through this presentation, I'm going to pause at certain parts of the presentation. I'm just going to look for your feedback. So you let them know it's coming, so you don't want to embarrass anybody, right, by just calling them out and having them be like, oh, no, sorry, I wasn't paying attention effectively. So you let them know that's happening. And then as you go through your presentation, you start, you kind of skip through some of the stuff that's not as relevant, and then you hyper-focus on the areas that are most relevant to their priorities and what they told you, and then pause, and then instead of saying stuff like, does that make sense, you say something like, you know what, you had said earlier that one of your priorities was this. Well, this is the part of our solution that really aligns with that and has an impact there. So, again, instead of does that make sense, you say, so help me understand, could you give me an example, or could you share with me how this would fit into your existing workflow or your existing process? Or could you give me an example or explain to me how you see this comparing to what you're doing now? Because the way that they explain to you how it compares to what they're doing now or how this would fit into their existing workflow tells you everything you need to know on whether or not it makes sense. All right? So, again, that's an example of content versus context. I would so much rather go through a demo of a rep who had a conversation with me up front and then took their presentation and cut it down to the most relevant parts that I think are, that'll help me achieve my goals. It's like when I do training. If any of you who have been through my training, you'll know that, the typical trainers, the way that you're taught to do sales training or training in front of a group is you start with a little icebreaker, ha ha ha, get the class laughing or whatever, and then you start droning through your PowerPoint presentation. And when somebody asks you that random question that's off topic, you say, you know what, that's a great question. I'm going to put that on the parking lot over here, and if we have any time left at the end of the presentation, I'll be happy to address that. Is that fair? Right? And you're like, oh, look at it, he put it up on the board, and he paid attention to me, but then they never leave time at the end of the presentation to address that. So that's the way trainers are trained to train. My approach is a lot different. I spend the first hour and a half going through, hey, quick intro, what do you guys want to get out of this? And diving into content immediately that is directly relevant to whatever that rep just said. Hey, John, I'm having a hard time with gatekeepers, or I'm having a hard time with this objection. If I could learn something about that, I'd appreciate it. So now instead of waiting until the mid-afternoon when objection handling part comes up, I dive into it right there. I'm like, well, here's some ideas around objection handling, a couple of different techniques to use, and then go to the next person. Because what I'm trying to show there is value in the first hour of the presentation, the first hour of my training, because that's what gets people hooked in for the rest of the presentation. It's the same thing with sales calls, whether they're over the phone or they're done in person. you got to get them bought in the first 5-10 minutes by showing value and by engaging with them. And if you just start by, hey, thanks for coming in, and start droning through your PowerPoint, you'll lose them almost immediately, and you'll see them. They'll start checking your iPhone. When you say, does that make sense, you'll get the, yep, knowing that you were just on mute and they were checking their voicemails, or they were checking their emails. I mean, that's what I do, by the way. When everybody does this, is when I get a demo, I have two screens. One is my main screen here, and then the other's my laptop. And usually on my laptop, I have my email up, and on the big screen, I have your demo. And as soon as I can tell that this rep is going through the motions with their demo, I go from that screen to this screen. I put you on hold, or I put you on mute, and I check my emails, and then I unmute every once in a while, going, "Yep, sure, sounds good. Yep, sounds good." Because that's content. You could have sent me a link with that recording, and you would have actually done a better job. You probably would have gotten further with me, because it would have saved me some time, and I could have listened to it on my time instead of listening to you drabble on. All right. So that context versus content is relevant at every stage of what we do. Prospecting, brand building, your personal brand. I talk a lot about that personal brand. Sorry, there's a bird behind me going crazy. But your personal brand, about, how do you build your personal brand? Well, it's not about just, getting as many Twitter followers as possible by putting as much content out there as you can, by, retweeting and all that other stuff. That has nothing to do with it. That's actually bad. If you get 10,000 Twitter followers that don't do anything and don't engage with you in any way, then that's not as good as 10 followers that actually do something when you tweet about it, right? So I wrote a post last week about how my mind switched when it came to social selling. And a lot of it started, where it switched was me paying attention and leveraging social to educate myself first. And then when I read something and I learned something about it, that's when I would share it with an audience, like Twitter and LinkedIn, and say, hey, anybody really, focus on these type of things, you should really take a look at this article, because it's really important, and this is how. That's how that context, or even disagreeing with an article. If you want to get some engagement, man, disagree with an article online. Like, read an article, think about it, give your response, be like, I actually disagree with what John said there, and this is why, right? That's what starts putting you in the position to be the thought leader. That's what puts you in the position to have people start paying attention to you. So that context is important, right? Then there's the demo and the presentation. Context is important. The sales, even how you present your proposal, right? Do you align what the client's priorities were with what your proposal is, and really prioritize those things of what's important? One of the things I never did early on in my career, or I got away from doing, and I'm back on doing now, is obviously I want to know what the priorities are from a business standpoint. What are you trying to accomplish, so I can align my solution with that? But I also want to know what the priorities are of this decision. Like, when you're like, what is the decision criteria? And what is the priorities? Like, what's most important in this decision process and least important in this decision process? And then as I learn that, I align my solution, the 20%, with those priorities. And that's how I develop my proposals. The other stuff is in there, don't get me wrong, but it's more of a appendix or an attachment or something like that, not a highlight in the presentation or the proposal. Okay? So I'm begging you to think about this context versus content thing, and ask yourself, are you just putting content out there? Could a marketing engine do this better, as good if not better than you? And if the answer to that's yes, pause for a minute and just say, what am I doing? What value am I bringing to the audience right now? And how can I put some, even just a little bit of context on top of this? All right. So that was really my main points for today, as far as the context versus content. Again, if you're not following Gary Vee, follow him. He's doing some really cool stuff on social. I'm trying to actually follow a lot of what he's doing. If you notice what I'm doing as far as building my brand, I'm doing similar things as Gary, because he's got a proven model around it. But that's why you see the Snapchat stuff. That's why you see the Instagram stuff. That's why you see the store, right? Because it's all about bringing value to your audience. and and then having something for the people who want to buy something, great, but don't. There's still enough content out there that you can go and leverage it to help produce some results. So make sure you hit up for the free stuff. Go to my website. I just redesigned it. My blog page I redesigned specifically with the idea of putting better content out there and making it easier to digest. There's the word digest. But go to jbarrows.com with the blog. And then also with the blog and the videos is my resource library on my website, where there's tons of videos that I really chop up all my content that I charge people for. So go out there, take a look at it, and then obviously you want to buy something, buy it. But the store, that's the Make It Happen. You like this gear here. I know it's backwards on the iPhone, but whatever. Most of that goes to charity anyways. I'm just doing that for some fun. We're coming out with a book and some notepads and stuff like that, so keep an eye out for that. And I got some huge announcements coming up here in Q4. So October 21st, be on the lookout for a pretty big announcement coming my way about a re-release of something. And then right before Dreamforce, November 1st, there's another big announcement that I'm shifting a whole bunch of stuff here in my mentality of what I'm trying to do. I'm trying to take things to another level. So as far as questions, we got about 5 minutes left here. There was one question I saw on the Facebook page that you asked, and the person said, "Hey, John, as a business owner, how much time should I be spending prospecting?" And it's a tough question to answer because I don't know the context. Here's a perfect example. I don't know the context of your role, but as a guideline here, as a former VP of Sales / business owner of an organization. You juggle a lot of stuff, right? And I'm a business owner of my own thing, and so I have to deliver my content. I have to do stuff like this. I have to have meetings with clients. I have to do customer service stuff, finance, marketing, kind of all that stuff as a business owner. And so prospecting tends to fall down pretty low on the list. But I'll tell you right now, prospecting is probably I won't say probably, is I think the most important thing that you can do as a business owner to keep your business going, right? Because at the end of the day, if you can't find more customers, you're not going to be in business for long. And so my recommendation, just like you've heard it before on these videos and these podcasts here, is to do at least an hour a day. Build it into your routine. So quick summary here is, find what is that ideal customer profile look like for you, right? Not just size and industry, but really what does a truly good client look like for you? Go find a list of like 25 of them or so, and then go follow those companies on tools like Owl or Sales Navigator, Google Alerts, whatever, even Facebook and Twitter, right? And create this morning routine just like mine, right? I have a morning routine from 7:30 to 8:30. So every morning I get up at around 5:30, 6 o'clock, try to do a little bit of working out, push-ups, sit-ups, those type of things. Go to Dunkin' Donuts, grab my, iced coffee and come back. And from 7:30 to 8:30, all I'm doing is scanning through data feeds. And I'm looking at like triggers and things that are happening in my target accounts, right? They open up a new office, they launch a new product. And I probably only fire off 3, 4, 5 really high-quality emails every single day, but I do it consistently. And that's what kind of keeps the prospecting engine going for me. And, I'll get a response or two, at least a response or two once a week by sending 2 or 3 emails every single day to my tier 1 accounts, right? And I get one of those tier 1 accounts. It tends to make my quarter, if nothing else. So that's what I would recommend as a business owner, is building it into your routine, but also having the information come to you as opposed to you always having to go out and do research on accounts. And then just always be selling, in the sense that to carry that hit list around with you no matter where you go. So when you're in partnership discussions or networking events and that type of thing, when somebody says, yeah, sure, let's share some business, why don't you go back to your office and see if you have anybody that would be good for me to talk to, and I'll do the same. Instead of that noise, take out your hit list and be like, hey, great, sounds like a plan. Could you do me a favor? Could you look at anybody on this list? Do you know anybody on this list? Because these are the clients that I'm really trying to get in touch with. Makes networking and lead gen a lot. It builds it into your process as a business owner, okay? I started a company back when I was 24 years old, and I was always at every event. I was at every networking group. I was selling all the time in addition to everything else that I was doing, and I'm still doing the same thing today. Right? I still prospect almost every day because, again, I found one solution to pretty much every other problem at every other stage of the sales process, and it's a big fat pipeline. You got a big fat pipeline. The rest of that stuff, you don't have to try too hard at the rest of that stuff. Negotiation, objection handling, discounting, all that stuff becomes a lot easier with a big fat pipeline. So we're wrapping things up here. But hopefully, by the way, if you do like this, and if you've been listening to this on Facebook Live, or you catch this on Facebook, we've turned this Make It Happen Mondays into a podcast. So go onto the Apple Store or go onto the Apple Podcast and search for it. You'll find it. We're getting it out there. We're getting some really good feedback. I'm trying to get into podcasts myself because I realized this past weekend I was into podcasts, but not as much. But now they're great. I'm really going to get into them because I realize how dependent I am on social. Small sidebar story here. I was in Germany last week, and so I missed the Patriots home opener. So I was like, you know what? I got a DVR at home. I'm going to DVR it. I told my wife and daughter, don't watch it. We're all going to watch it together on Friday night when I come home. And so I was like, see you later. I'm not going to be on social anymore, everybody. I'll see you. I'm gone for a day, right? So I did everything I could to avoid social. I avoided Snapchat. I avoided Instagram. I avoided Facebook, everything, which is way harder than you think it is when you're so ingrained in it, right? And I did it. I got home. I didn't hear about the score. I didn't check any updates. So I was fresh, clean, ready to watch the game. And as I walk in the door, I go to my daughter. I'm like, hey, you ready to you gonna watch the game tonight? It's gonna be super exciting, right? And she's like, ooh, Daddy, you didn't hear? And I was like, no. And so she kind of ruined it for. Ultimately ruined it, but it was probably the best thing because then I didn't have to sit through 2 hours of watching the Patriots lay an egg. But anyways, my point is I'm going to get more into podcasts and listening to more of these podcasts to kind of break the time up while I'm traveling. And so that's why I put the podcast out there. So it's not just Facebook. It's the exact stuff transcribed onto podcasts. So download that. Let me know what you think about it. Help me share it out there. I'd really appreciate it. Again, any likes or shares on any of the stuff I put out there is always greatly appreciated. And if you have any questions, feel free to send me an email, john@jbarrows. Hit me up on Snapchat. It's John M as in Michael Barrows, both Twitter, Snapchat, and Instagram. I'm always open to answering questions and trying to put as much value out there as possible, all right? Make it a great week, everybody. Again, focus on what you can control, eat, effort, attitude, and how we treat people, okay? Make it a great week. Make it happen. Love you all. Later.